all set.
You guys are good?
Yep.
Ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so I'm going to the White House tomorrow to interview Vice President's Chief of Staff. Like, I don't think you can really wear a hat when you do an interview in these wings. So, like, I'm trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with my hair? It looks like a circus clown.
You know, I didn't really pack when I fled and ran away from New York City for, like, White House interviews. So this is what I'm going with. Gray on gray. This is kind of what the girlfriend decided on with that nice blue. And then I got these, oh no, I don't. I got those shoes. All right, it's 5:45 in the morning. We're about to leave Pinehurst, North Carolina. We're headed for the White House. We're interviewing Marc, who is the Chief of Staff of the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, who is currently the chair of the coronavirus task force. So we're heading to D.C., which I believe is where the White House is. All right, we got about 5 hours, Pinehurst to D.C. Looks like there's some sort of roadkill here. Watch out, folks. Watch out. Oh no, I don't want that one. Anyways, quick little Virginia pee break. Pray for me here. Yikes. It's kind of cool coming in, you know, it's a little intense. You go through the security and, you know, I mean, it's a pretty serious deal, obviously. One of the most secure places on the planet. Should be the most secure place on the planet. But we made it. We're in D.C. and we're going to roll up into the Eisenhower building and then the White House and grab some information for the people. It's for the people. All right, we're here, we're in D.C. We're with the Chief of Staff of the Vice President, Mike Pence of the United States. My first question is very simply, you know, I've watched The West Wing. I know it's different politics, but a lot of us that sort of watch those kinds of shows and whatnot, you're the Chief of Staff, your job. Does pretty much everything go through you? Does everything that gets to Mike Pence to the Vice President go through Marc?
I wouldn't give you that impression, Riggs. I think that the Vice President and the President, fortunately, have a really close relationship, and they talk multiple times a day. There's no way that everything flows through me, but I think that they're fortunate that they have such a close relationship that they usually talk every morning before the day starts. They usually talk at the end of the day on the phone, and throughout the day they're together in the Oval lot. I don't know that our White House functions like the West Wing or other White Houses in that sense, and that there's a lot more. This president, you know, he's used to running a large family business, and he wants to have that interaction with his senior staff. And so it's probably not as structured as some, but at the same time, I think it provides their opportunity to get together a lot and share thoughts.
Right. So, you know, I'm not a journalist, and most people that are going to watch this, most of our audience, a lot of the perception of what goes on in this environment is similar to that. You watch a TV show and you just think, oh, that must be how it is. And there's a ton of eyeballs on the White House right now, on the federal government right now. What is it like in these meetings, making these huge decisions that are pretty much unprecedented in our time? You know, how stressful is it? How intense are these meetings right now?
Well, Riggs, I think our days usually start, I'm usually in here before 7. I think most of us are here till about 9 or 10 at night trying to work through various issues right now. It's a heightened pace, but I think that I'm really proud that the way the Vice President has been given this responsibility by the President and led a whole of government approach, and the way that he's pulled together a lot of different agencies across our government, but also what you've heard the President and the Vice President talk about is the whole of America approach. That what we're seeing is an amazing amount of private sector companies step forward and want to be helpful. Whether or not that's distilleries coming forward and providing hand sanitizer, whether or not that's GM looking to retrofit manufacturing to provide ventilators. It's a pretty amazing thing to see the way that our government works, is that we rely upon the will of the American people more than the strong hand of government coming and telling you what you must do. And so I think it's been pretty exciting to be able to watch that.
How fine of a line is that? You know, the kind of violating people's rights, right? We're in America, we're a free country, and all of a sudden we're being told, I think it's over a third of America now is pretty much being told shelter in place, don't leave your house, don't leave your apartment. How difficult is it to kind of walk that line, navigate that fine line between, you know, safety, public health, telling people, you can't leave your place. You can't go do these things, telling bars, restaurants who have been in business for a long time, you have to essentially shut down. How do you navigate kind of walking that line?
I think the way we navigate it is that we rely upon the cooperation of the American people. It's not, as you said, like communist China, where you can come in and tell people you must shelter in place and not leave your house. But what we try to do is share as much information as possible with the American people so they understand what the threat of the virus is and to whom that threat is. And so in many cases, as you've learned over the last couple weeks of this, we've seen an incredible skewing toward older people with serious underlying conditions.
Right.
But many others can transmit it and carry it, which is why we're asking for their help and participation. But the great thing about our federalist system is that our job in the federal government is to provide as much information to the public as possible. And then governors and mayors and other local officials can determine what restrictions they want to put on locally. Our guidelines, we're asking everybody to cooperate with. Those 15 days to slow the spread. And I think that if you look at those, they are saying we prefer that people not gather in groups of more than 10 to stop the spread. But the sort of the enforcement gets pushed down to local levels for them to do. And, voters ultimately can get a chance to decide if they think that's the appropriate measure or not. But we were here in America, I think what's great is we rely upon the cooperation of the American people with as much information shared. And as I said, it's been pretty inspiring to see the cooperation level that Americans want to come together to protect each other.
It is, and it's amazing, but it is also, even myself having been in New York a couple weeks ago and then in North Carolina and different places, there's a varying degree in different places how sort of seriously people are taking it. At what level does the government feel it's kind of its job to say to the people, like, you guys aren't getting it, you guys aren't figuring it out, and you have to stay in, otherwise this is going to cripple and crush the economy, it's going to kill people, it's going to lead to the loss of life. Like, how do you kind of measure where you're at in that and ultimately how to kind of execute that?
Well, I do think that the president took quick action in stopping travel from China, then took action to stop travel coming in from Europe. But the reality is that those sort of seeds were still planted here for the virus to spread. And so therefore, that's why we came in about 8-9 days ago and asked that these are guidelines we're asking all Americans to follow. As our data gets better, we can refine those guidelines and provide better guidance to a lot of people because the threat is varied in different levels. It's true, it can spread by travel. But what we're seeing sadly right now, Riggs, in New York City, is it's not just the last several days have had more than half the new cases, more than half the total cases are now residing in the New York area. And so does it make sense that the same measures you put in place for Wyoming or for Alabama are the same ones you have in New York? That's a debate that we're still trying to figure out, and I think you'll see more guidance coming out in the next few days about that. But you're right. You need to have everybody cooperate with it, and I think that what you've seen in New York is far more stringent enforcement come in place in the last few days, which is welcome. But clearly that the virus has spread significantly throughout the Newark area now.
So if you were someone like me or someone like the millions of people across the country who are sort of locked down in their apartments or their homes, and they're saying, okay, I've done what I've been asked to do for the most part. I'm hunkered down. I'm staying here. Who would you listen to? Because the messaging I think is very important, and just as a kind of, again, an average person who I'm trying to read stuff and trying to watch different channels so I can get a few different opinions and pick out. And when you have the president at one point is saying the cure can't be worse than the actual virus, and then you have Fauci, who says, so sometimes I can't grab the mic, but then you also have things like you said of early on, in late January, the task force was put forth, a critical decision to stop travel from China in certain places was put into place that definitely worked and had an impact. So if you were someone like us, like, we're looking for people to tell us kind of what to do, who would you suggest that we listen to? Well,
I think it's one of the reasons we're trying to do a daily press conference from the White House. As you know, before the coronavirus outbreak, our press briefings were more sporadic.
Yeah.
So we've been trying to do one a day for the last few weeks, and I think we bring together not just the president and vice president, but typically Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and others to provide guidance. And I think something that's important to remember is that when Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci give advice from a physician's perspective, it's how do you make sure the virus doesn't spread?
Right.
The President of the United States has a lot of different responsibilities, including protecting the American people as first and foremost, but he has to balance that with other factors too. one of the reasons we pushed that guidance out is because we felt if we could shorten the duration of this outbreak and blunt how severe it is, that we can get through this faster, which then can lead to turning the economy back on, as you've heard the president say. So that's why we've asked everyone, including your listeners, and thank you for having Dr. Fauci on before, because getting that message out, particularly to younger audiences, of how they're a part of this, even if they feel invincible and feel like they're not susceptible to the virus in the same way, they can be carriers. And so that's the reason we provide that guidance, just to try to get to the other side of this faster. And we've seen in places where they took similar measures, they got to the other side of the outbreak quicker. You're already seeing places in Asia come back. And, as tragic and as sad as what's happened to Italy is, what you've seen in the last couple of days, in fact, is the number of fatalities decline over the last few days because they reached their peak. Sadly, I think it was too late for when they put in a lot of their measures. But this outbreak is typically 8 to 10 weeks where you've seen it before. And so the more you can blunt this, by having everybody cooperate with the guidelines, the sooner we can get back to getting people back to work and hopefully getting, sports games going again in their country.
We need that.
We do need
sports.
that.
We need
We
sports
all
back
need that.
big time. It's difficult in that, with other kind of national or global tragedies with 9/11, we did, sports sort of brought us back and was key in bringing people together and finding something to celebrate and all that. And it's difficult without anything like that. When, I do a golf podcast, we talk about golf tournaments a lot. We try to kind of hypothesize, guess, predict when we could be back having, major sporting events. I mean, if someone were to try to guess, is May way too soon? Is June too soon? Like when, because now if we can't have gatherings more than, 6 or 10 or whatever, how are we gonna have stadiums with, 50, 100,000 people in them?
I think it's too soon for me to give you a definitive answer. I'm not a doctor, but I did sleep at Holiday Inn Express last night, so I'll try to give you, I think, a little bit of guidance here that we've been hearing, which
How was
is
that bit?
just to say that, let's say, if you're out in the public and you're spaced, that is a much less risk than perhaps being in a closed arena together. And so, as you can imagine, there are probably some sporting environments in which that could be more conducive in an earlier time frame than others where perhaps the threat of spread is greater. And I think as we get in this 15-day window, you'll see additional guidelines provided about somehow outdoor activities are certainly safer than perhaps some of the indoor activities in cities in particular where there's significant hotspots. So again, it may not need to be a one-size-fits-all. It could be a staggered solution in which some parts of the country and some outdoor activities are different than, say, indoor arenas in areas where there are hotspots.
So at the White House, you were the Director of Legislative Affairs. We just passed the stimulus. I think it's $2 trillion. Any article you read, any segment you watch, they always bring up the impact on, the service industry, on bars, on restaurants, and that's having a trickle effect really on everybody. So the stimulus package, first of all, what is the process like trying to get something like that done and get it done quickly because of the urgency of the situation?
Typically, when there's an urgent crisis that kind, you see kind of the best of America and people putting aside partisan divides and coming together to do something. Conversely, what you also see, though, is opportunity for others to say, we know this bill is going to get passed, so here's my opportunity to slide something in because it's going to get passed. So this other measure that perhaps I've had less success advancing in Congress, if I can attach it to this vehicle, I can get it through. And that's the challenge, is how do you say, look, guys, we have to do this in a timely fashion, so this bill is moving quick, and we need to make sure you're keeping things that are side issues off of it. But that's the challenge of making sausage in Washington, D.C., is that...
So when people do that, what do you just publicly shame them for doing that?
I think that perhaps that's the most successful route, is the public shaming to get those
Right.
measures out of the bill. But it's one of the reasons why, last weekend we thought we had an agreement, and it ended up dragging on a few extra days because there were extra provisions that we felt certainly did not pertain to the current coronavirus outbreak, but other legislators saw it as an opportunity to get what they wanted attached to a bill.
So the part of my take, guys, when they did have Dr. Fauci on, they asked the question and prefaced it with, please explain it to me like I'm 8. So the stimulus, act like I'm 8 years old and I don't understand, economics, stimulus packages, where $2 trillion goes. What are some of the highlights? What do people kind of need to know and understand? Where's that money going to, and how's it going to help?
I think the biggest things are direct payments to families. Obviously, there's a income cap at that, about $100,000, so it's truly $99,000 under families up to 4 will average about $3,000 because we feel, as you've said, where there's been sort of stalling altogether the economy, providing that cash infusion is good. Second is small businesses. So you talk about restaurants and bars. There's making sure that they have the small loans that they need to keep their business afloat so they can make payroll, so they don't have to lay off employees who have been impacted by the last few weeks and can continue to bridge this to the other side. So a lot more liquidity provided from the Small Business Association, specifically for small businesses like restaurants and bars that are most impacted. Also, an area that's impacted is transportation. So when you say you can't travel, to Europe and we're not taking flights back in, obviously that's impacted the airline business a lot, and there's funding provided for that. I do think it's different. In my mind, it's very different than, let's say, the bailouts of the banks after the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, because in that case, I think banks are making bad decisions in a lot of the loans they gave. And I think there's a fair debate to say, is every taxpayer responsible for that? In this case, as we're back to our earlier conversation, you have the government issuing guidelines that basically tell people they can't travel. That's not a market failure. That's a health crisis. And in that case, I think it's fair to say, how do we make sure the airline industry gets through this?
Can people fly domestically right now? Should people fly?
People can fly domestically right now, and I think that a lot of the input we get from the airlines is the dramatic steps they've taken to make sure that there's extra cleaning going on. And they found that for a lot of their passengers, it gives them a sense of comfort. But I do think there's also still hotspot areas that, as you know, just yesterday we said that people traveling out of New York City should quarantine themselves for up to 2 weeks because the rate of infection there right now is so much more significant than other parts of the country.
So I want to kind of try to figure out where you think we might be in the broader scope of this whole thing. Let's say if the front end of it is you're a college basketball team, that's the first team ever to lose as a number 1 seed to a 16 seed, and then the better end of it is when you finally win
You're still the reigning national champion.
a championship.
You're still reigning national champion.
So where are we then on that? If this is kind of the bottom and this would be the top, where would we be on that scale? And you happen to be a Virginia guy.
Right, which
from
is
what
why, as I
understand,
said, you're
right.
still the reigning national champion. There's nobody that's taken that claim.
With the peak and all that, like where the peak and kind of, because people right now it's doom and gloom. You're sitting in your apartment, like I said, it's sad. You haven't been outside, you haven't seen the sun, you got no vitamin D, you haven't seen your friends, you're Skyping every day.
So again, I think one of the things that we can be more clear, I think you'll begin to see some of this messaging today or perhaps tomorrow, is that it's not bad to be outside. It's not bad. We're not asking you to be clustered in large groups at the moment, but you shouldn't feel the need to stay sheltered inside your house in every community. New York, again, is a little bit different, but there's going to be different guidelines elsewhere. I'd say where we are is that we obviously are now doing much more widespread testing, and that data has given us a better perspective of where you are in that sort of bell curve of the outbreak. We have not seen the cases begin to decline yet, obviously. So we still have a ways to go, Riggs. I think that's the bottom line. But what we take comfort in is looking that South Korea was roughly about 7 weeks. China was about 8 weeks. We're beginning to study where it is elsewhere, and you can sort of give it a timeline, which is why the president's looking toward Easter to be able to say, at that point, are we well over the peak of the outbreak and on our way down in a way that we can get Americans back to work and hopefully back out to sporting events.
How difficult is it with the lag of the numbers, right? Like we're just finding out in New York that with their testing so much more now that the cases are going up, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 cases, whatever, and we kind of keep hearing that, well, that's actually the numbers reflective of what it was a couple weeks ago. And so, how, I guess, like how accurate is
Correct.
that?
The good news is there's far more testing available now. But you're right, is that it distorts some of the numbers because there is a lag there. In many cases, those were people who were probably infected several days ago, right, and just now they're getting their test results back. So you don't know the full impact of the 15 days to slow the spread and the measures that we ask people to abide by. So it does skew the data. That is true. On the other side of that, though, what we're continuing to see is that the data we're collecting is that, in many cases, people have very mild symptoms. In many cases, they could be asymptomatic. And the more testing you do reveals that. There's no doubt that there are some who, particularly, again, the older population with other health conditions for which this can be a far more deadly virus and a far more serious virus. And so if you look at the spectrum of the American population as a whole, what you're seeing is that younger people may never even know they have it. There was some tragic news out of California yesterday, we believe the first younger victim of the virus, but at the same time, in Italy, where they've had more deaths, a few thousand more deaths than China even, not one death under the age of 30. South Korea, not one death under the age of 30. But again, because they could be carrier to older populations, it's a much different scenario.
Yeah, one of my big concerns is that, I saw Governor Cuomo on a couple days ago, and he was saying, the numbers are not getting better, they're getting worse. And with the lag, I do think, and again, this is kind of my understanding of it, that it's important for people to understand that, like what we're doing, because it's been, let's say it's been a week or it's been a week and a half that people have really been committed to this self-quarantine, staying inside, doing everything to another level, that we won't see if that's really working for a few weeks, right? It's not instant that you find out that that's working.
I think that there's truth in that. I think that when the president begins to look toward Easter, people in the media, I think, are also confused, assuming that, does that mean at the end of this 15-day window, all of a sudden we're going to flip a switch and go a different direction? I don't think that's where the White House is headed in any way. I think, again, there are gradations of this. There could be continued guidance across the country. There could be continued guidance in some areas of the country. There could be different guidance given to other governors based upon the data that we're seeing there. We have seen, we don't know this is the case yet, so we have to be careful in providing this guidance, but we have seen the coronavirus is a family of other viruses. And we have seen that typically in this family of viruses, that when the weather's warmer and more humid, it doesn't do as well as when it's colder and drier. So, as we head toward the end of the spring, that's another reason to perhaps believe that we can get over the hump of this bell curve and get to the other side sooner.
What's going on with the ventilators? So we keep hearing a ton about the ventilators. New York needs, 30,000 of them. I think there's 20,000 in a stockpile. Where are we at with ventilators, making sure they get to the areas that are getting close to their peak and they're the hardest hit? And then, I understand we can then move them to kind of the next areas that reach that point and kind of utilize the stockpile. That's the whole reason we're supposed to have it. What's the situation with the ventilators?
We had about 12,700 ventilators in the stockpile. Of those, 2,000 were sent to New York last night, another 2,000 going today, so 4,000 going to New York City. I think we need to have a continued analysis of the 30,000 figure that Governor Cuomo has put out. There's no doubt, as we've said several times, that New York City is the epicenter of this at this moment. And so they're getting the vast majority of supplies that we have out of the stockpile. Well, not just ventilators, but also masks, gowns, other equipment. Encouraging news, though, is that we've also seen those companies that produce ventilators, they're upping their production. And we've also seen, as we were talking about before, automobile companies actually come and volunteer to say, I can take this plant and turn it into a ventilator plant for you. And we're working with them to see how quickly we can get that online. So we're ramping up production across the country to meet the needs of where it is most needed. But we do have, as I said, 4,000 ventilators sent to New York City in the last 24 hours, and presumably more coming soon.
So let's talk about kind of turning the economy back on and coming out of this thing. Even sort of what I understand is that there should even be a wave, and I believe this is what's happening in China, of folks who got the coronavirus, were able to get through it, are considered immune afterwards, and can then go back to work because you're not going to spread it, this, that. How important is that to kind of the plan of, okay, even if you've been isolated for 2 weeks, you're immune now, we can start putting those people back to work. Is that a big part of the plan, and kind of what is the plan to get us going again?
Well, I think there are other considerations that, people, if they've lost jobs, there could be obviously other health consequences to that, candidly. So as we look toward getting to the other side of this outbreak, I do think this legislation passed should be a juice to the economy and make sure that people have the resources they need, hopefully, to get through this period of time. I saw today news that 95% of McDonald's have reopened in China, but that's been probably a 3-month period for them. Again, I think for us, it's going to be different parts of the country will probably come back faster than other parts where the virus outbreak is more intense.
I did see 365 Waffle Houses closed, so what are you guys going to do to save Waffle House?
We need to save Waffle House. Waffle House is a great company that fortunately hasn't needed a lot of financial support from the federal government.
I'm going to comb through that stimulus and look for the Waffle House.
It's fair. Let me know if you find it for Waffle House.
A couple just practical situations. Let's say you had a wedding scheduled in April, and obviously that can't go down anymore. You can't have the large gatherings. There's an opening with your venue in July. Is that, people are wondering, are we safe to book something like that as early as July? Do you need to wait until the fall? When would you feel comfortable booking something that's going to be a relatively large gathering like a wedding again?
I've not been a wedding planner before, Riggs, so it's a little bit hard for me to give you that specific guideline. But I think that what we believe is it's hard for people to feel like they need to make the long-range plans. This is so new for a lot of us, and the guidance we're giving is coming in real time. I do think in some cases people have taken very precautionary measures, but they've canceled way out, and perhaps not always necessary to go as far out as they have been. I don't know that I can tell you today July is the right time, but I wouldn't be canceling something in July either right now. Hopefully we'll have this the other side of the outbreak much sooner than that, and people can return back to their returns. I know for baseball they're looking at if they start June 1, how do you still get in 100+ games?
Right.
Hopefully that will be on pace for that.
Well, we also could be headed for, just a bombardment of amazing sporting events. We could have NHL, NBA playoffs, baseball starting up, a bunch of golf major championships all within like a month or two of each other. So we might be headed for a really good time.
I'm anxious for it to start as soon as it possibly can, because I think having 2 teenage boys in the house without school and without sports, it's a little
How do you keep
challenging.
them entertained?
It's pretty challenging on Mrs. Short right
They're
now.
not watching your interviews on.
No, I
cable news?
hope they have better things to do than that, but they do watch Barstool Sports, so maybe they'll catch this one.
I appreciate that. If you're a bartender and your bar closed down, you don't have a job right now, you hear maybe that the stimulus is the deal is there to help you, but what do those people need to do? What's their next step? How do they make sure that they're taken care of?
So in many cases, those resources are provided in additional resources to the Small Business Administration. So the bar owner can apply to the Small Business Administration for those loans to make sure that his or her employees continue to stay on payroll. There's also additional assistance that's being provided down to the states to receive. I think the best thing we can do for the American people is to make sure they're following the guidance as strictly as possible so we can end this outbreak faster. That's the fastest way to get the economy turned back on and for the economy to get going again. We think the fundamentals underneath the economy remain strong. We have to get through the outbreak. Hopefully we'll be able to bounce back as soon as possible because tax rates remain low. We've seen there's still significant capital invested, and so we think this can get turned on in a hurry as soon as we get to the other side of the outbreak. So we need everybody's cooperation right now.
So again, every DC-related, power struggle-related show or movie I've ever seen, the vice president and his team are always angling for the main job. So what are you guys cooking up right now?
I think that the vice president is somebody who feels very blessed to be partnering with this president. He feels very lucky to be in the position he is, to be able to serve the American people the way that he does. And, I've had the honor of working for him for a while, and one of the first principles we've always had is to have a servant's heart and a servant's attitude in the role that you're in. And I think that's something that we try to instill upon our team, and hopefully we're here to support the president and his goals. He's the one that was elected president.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Well, look, you guys, obviously, your boss is the chair of the task force for the coronavirus. It's everywhere right now. It's the most one of the more important things we've ever dealt with. So keep up the great work. We appreciate the time, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Riggs. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we're back. I made it back to Pinehurst. Put a hat on, thank God for everybody. Pretty insane day, pretty surreal day. I ended up after the interview with Mr. Marc Short, got a nice tour of the West Wing, and met the vice president. I actually got elbows. I got a little elbow move from the vice president. I'm standing in this corner. Everything's real tight. It's tight quarters in the West Wing, in the White House. We chatted for a couple minutes. I dropped an incredible line, kind of a go-to all over Twitter, but I dropped it in front of him and the crew about, our generation's gonna crush this coronavirus thing because we're very good at just sitting on the couch. And boy, did it play in the room. I mean, people were dying. And the vice president could have been nicer. I'm significantly larger than he is, was kind of my second takeaway. My first takeaway was he was just incredibly nice. Regardless of your politics, it was it's cool to be at the White House, and it's an important message for pretty much everybody. And I'm glad I was able to get it out a little bit. Let's crush the corona. Let's kill the corona, man.